The U.S. Venezuela standoff remains shrouded in uncertainty, with rumors of armed invasion proving baseless. The reality is a protracted tug-of-war over oil interests and geopolitical influence, marked by intertwined sanctions and countermeasures. Cooperation with China and Russia has become pivotal for Venezuela's breakthrough. Early 2026 saw the U.S. ease some sanctions, offering a glimmer of detente. The trajectory of this silent battle holds implications for Latin American peace and the global energy landscape. In January 2026, Caracas awoke to morning sunlight piercing the mist and bathing the oil fields along the Orinoco River. Amid the slow, rhythmic hum of pumping units, the struggles and uncertainties of a once great oil power lay concealed. While rumors of U.S. military invasion and presidential arrest stirred international frenzy, Venezuelan President Maduro attended a routine domestic policy meeting. Before the cameras, his composed demeanor stood in stark contrast to portrayals of him as a captive prisoner. On one side, war fears spread through neighborhoods. On the other, the state apparatus operated smoothly. What real power struggles lay hidden behind this whirlwind of Venezuelan discourse? And how would the Energy Strategy Report on Venezuela, sitting in Washington's Oval Office, reshuffle Latin America's geopolitical chessboard? Rumors of a U.S. military invasion of Venezuela have swept through Caracas like occasional sandstorms unsettling yet never substantiated by authoritative sources. As of January 9, 2026, neither the United Nations, the United States, nor Venezuela has issued any military operation announcements. Claims of Trump issuing combat orders or U.S. troops massing for invasion appear more like baseless castles in the air. The true nature of U.S.-Venezuela relations resembles a protracted tug-of-war. Flags of sanctions end. Counter-sanctions are alternately waved, yet neither side has crossed the red line of large-scale military conflict. Caracas streets remain bustling with traffic, and the steadiness of social order silently shatters the unfounded speculation about raging warfare. Amidst this tug-of-war of rumors, claims like military operation codenamed Absolute Determination and targeting Maduro's capture once circulated. Yet anyone with basic knowledge of international politics understands that attempting a cross-border arrest of a sovereign head of state would be tantamount to detonating an atomic bomb on the peaceful global political stage, inevitably triggering worldwide condemnation and strong intervention from the United Nations. Yet the reality is that the international media landscape has remained calm. No official statements or public opinion waves have supported these rumors, which ultimately amount to nothing more than unfounded gossip. Equally implausible is the exaggerated claim that the U.S. military assembled 150 aircraft and integrated 3 branches. Major U.S. military deployments are never concealed. They are either announced through official channels or tracked by international military monitoring satellites. Much like a massive elephant cannot hide behind a tree, a military mobilization of such scale, if real, would have long dominated global media headlines. Yet to this day, neither U.S. Department of Defense announcements nor authoritative military media reports offer any corroborating evidence. These descriptions remain nothing more than fictional fabrications. The alleged combat scenarios such as U.S. airstrikes on Venezuelan military facilities or special forces deployment to Caracas lack even the most basic factual foundation. A large-scale military conflict would inevitably leave battlefield traces, trigger refugee flows, or prompt war reports from the involved nations, all unavoidable markers. Yet as of January 2026, Venezuela shows no such signs. Citizens in Caracas continue their daily routines, with bustling markets and cheerful street scenes reflecting a peaceful reality that starkly contradicts the rumored, war-torn narrative. Among these unfounded rumors, the name of the U.S. Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment has also surfaced. To those following military developments, the unit's codename Night Stalkers is legendary. They excel at high-risk missions like helicopter infiltration and rescue operations under cover of darkness, operating like hunters in the night, precise and lethal. It was this unit that provided aerial transport and support during Operation Neptune Spear, the mission that killed Osama bin Laden, cementing its reputation Yet linking this unit to capturing Maduro seems particularly far-fetched. The rumor also claims the operation was executed by Delta Force rather than SEALs, attempting to emphasize its professionalism. Yet this narrative resembles adding details to a fictional tale. No matter how vivid, it cannot alter its fabricated nature. Ultimately, without any real operation to substantiate it, even the most elaborate descriptions of force deployment remain mere castles in the air. Even more absurd is the rumor that Trump announced Maduro's capture, claiming Maduro and his spouse were transported to the U.S., complete with on-site footage of them wearing Nike tracksuits. A simple fact-check reveals Trump's personal social media has not posted such content recently, and no official U.S. announcement exists. In reality, as of January 9, 2026, Maduro continues to perform his presidential duties normally, recently attending domestic events and delivering public addresses. His presence stands as the most powerful rebuttal to these false rumors. The claim that Trump held a press conference declaring his intent to push for regime change in Venezuela and take over the country's governance is equally baseless. No such remarks appear in official records from the White House or the State Department, nor were they covered by authoritative media outlets. In reality, U.S. official statements on Venezuela have consistently centered on sanctions policies and calls for democratic reforms, never including extreme expressions like directly taking over governance that violate international law. This would be akin to labeling a tiger as a sheep, completely at odds with the fundamental logic of U.S. foreign policy. The claim that Trump appointed Rubio as Venezuela's governor is even more preposterous. The title governor is a relic of colonialism, fundamentally at odds with contemporary international norms. As a nation that professes respect for sovereignty, the U.S. would never undertake such a globally condemned action. Moreover, no official U.S. announcement of such an appointment has ever been issued, nor has the international community reacted to it. This rumor thoroughly exposes its fabricated nature. Only by dispelling these falsehoods can we discern the true nature of U.S.-Venezuela relations. Washington's focus on Venezuela has always revolved around energy interests and geopolitical maneuvering. Following this thread, we delve into this silent contest to uncover its underlying motivations. Based on research from authoritative institutions and official information, the strategic pressure exerted by the United States on Venezuela primarily stems from four core motivations: oil resource interests, geopolitical maneuvering, countering drug issues, and managing immigration challenges. These four factors intertwine like four ropes, collectively tightening the strained dynamics of U.S.-Venezuela relations. Next, we will untangle these ropes one by one to uncover the underlying truth. Among these four drivers, oil resource interests form the most pivotal strand. Like a magnet drawing iron filings, they firmly capture America's attention. Though U.S. officials have never publicly declared an intent to take over Venezuela's oil industry, its sanctions policies targeting Venezuelan oil and its strategic energy budget clearly reveal ambitions to dominate energy supply in the Americas. This ambition is concealed within the historical data of U.S. Venezuela energy trade and manifests in current industrial interdependencies. Venezuela is globally recognized as a petroleum treasure trove, according to the latest data released by Xinhua News Agency on January 5, 2026. Its proven oil reserves exceed 300 billion barrels, accounting for approximately 17% of global reserves. This surpasses Saudi Arabia, solidifying Venezuela's position as the world's top holder of proven oil reserves. Most of this oil is viscous heavy crude, concentrated in the Orinoco region of central Venezuela. Looking back to the 1990s, Venezuela's oil industry was in its golden age, producing over 3 million barrels per day, with nearly 2 million barrels exported to the United States, making it a vital energy backyard for the U.S. Today, however, this backyard has withered. Daily production now falls below a quarter of its peak levels, driven by both the lingering impact of U.S. sanctions and the domestic challenges facing Venezuela's oil sector. Venezuela's heavy crude oil, as viscous as solidified honey, cannot flow through pipelines under normal temperature and pressure conditions. To overcome this challenge, Venezuela has long imported light crude from producers like Iran. Blending the two oils in specific ratios dilutes the heavy crude, enabling smooth pipeline transport, much like adding warm water to viscous honey to make it easier to pour. Even with this blending solution, Venezuela's oil transportation system remains riddled with problems. Like an aging person, this vast network has deteriorated due to chronic underfunding and lack of technical maintenance over its operational lifespan. While rumors suggest over 25 critical pipelines are ruptured, requiring $58 billion for repairs, these figures lack verification from authoritative assessments. Official Venezuelan industry reports confirm the aging of transportation infrastructure, yet no publicly available authoritative statistics exist regarding the exact number of damaged pipelines or the required repair costs. What is clear is that the system's deterioration is further crippling Venezuela's oil industry. More fatal than aging infrastructure is the exodus of specialized talent from the oil sector. In the 1990s, PDVSA, the industry's backbone, employed over 40,000 professionally trained, experienced engineers and technicians who sustained the entire petroleum system. But today, this backbone has bent. While unverified claims of core technical personnel plummeting to fewer than 12,000 lack recent authoritative data, the exodus of PDVSA talent is widely acknowledged within the industry. Driven by economic conditions and sanctions, a significant number of top petroleum professionals have left Venezuela to pursue opportunities in oil-rich or politically stable regions like Texas, Canada, and Colombia. Those remaining are largely inexperienced newcomers, insufficient to sustain normal industry operations. Compounded by aging infrastructure, talent depletion, and prolonged U.S. sanctions, Venezuela's oil sector now faces an extremely difficult situation. While the U.S. is well aware of these challenges and closely monitors them, the rumor that Trump announced major U.S. oil companies would enter Venezuela to invest billions in facility repairs is entirely fabricated. Not only do the cited English statements lack any authoritative corroboration, but current U.S. sanctions policies make it impossible for American companies to legally enter Venezuela for oil-related investments or operations in the near term. Washington's close monitoring reflects opportunistic waiting rather than proactive assistance. For the U.S., controlling Venezuela's oil resources is like holding two keys. One key unlocks the door to energy security. Although the U.S. itself is a major oil producer with substantial capacity, it will still take a long time to completely break free from its dependence on foreign oil. During this transitional phase, stabilizing Venezuela's oil supply would not only safeguard U.S. energy security but also regulate domestic and international oil prices. By influencing Venezuela's production levels, the U.S. could even curb abnormal fluctuations in global oil prices, thereby impacting OPEC and the broader petroleum market. The other key unlocks industrial complementarity. Venezuela's heavy crude requires specialized refining technology and equipment, while the U.S. possesses dozens of refineries with mature processing capabilities, a perfect match. This resource technology synergy allows the U.S. to maximize its interests. Precisely for this reason, control over oil resources has become the core motivation behind America's intense focus on Venezuela. Beyond oil interests, geopolitical maneuvering is another major driver of U.S. Venezuela tensions. Like two chess players on a board, every move carries hidden implications. Before delving into this geopolitical chess game, let's insert a light-hearted interlude. World of Warcraft, Mists of Pandaria Classic is now live. Players can log in immediately to immerse themselves in the Eastern-inspired continent of Pandaria, unlocking the adorable Pandaren race and agile monk class. As the mists of the continent clear, challenges await: the new level cap of 90, the Mushroom Mountain Treasure Raid Dungeon, and 7 new scenario campaigns supporting 3-player real-time matchmaking for smooth, fast-paced combat. When you need a break, head to Sunriver Farm to experience pastoral life as a farmer. A new PvP season and pet battle system are also live, collect rare creatures and compete for arena supremacy. Interested players can click the pinned link in the comments section to return to Pandaria and begin a new adventure. Interlude over. We return to this geopolitical chessboard. U.S. intervention in Latin America has deep historical roots, traceable back to the 1823 Monroe Doctrine. Then President James Monroe drew a red line for European powers, declaring they must not expand influence on the American continent effectively, designating the Americas as America's backyard. For nearly 2 centuries thereafter, the United States acted as the backyard's master, frequently meddling in Latin American domestic affairs under the pretext of the Monroe Doctrine, even resorting to military force to overthrow foreign governments on multiple occasions. Historical data indicates that between 1898 and 1994, the United States orchestrated at least 41 regime changes in Latin America, 17 of which were achieved through direct military intervention. U.S. Venezuela relations had previously experienced relatively peaceful periods. Early on, both nations maintained normal cooperation in diplomatic and economic spheres, with Venezuelan oil flowing steadily to the U.S. and American capital investing in Venezuela's petroleum industry. However, this dynamic underwent a complete transformation after Hugo Chavez assumed the Venezuelan presidency in 1999. Upon taking office, Chavez deeply recognized the critical importance of controlling oil resources for national development. He implemented a series of nationalization reforms in the oil sector, gradually transferring oil assets previously controlled by foreign capital into state ownership. The Venezuelan state-owned oil company PDVSA became the absolute dominant player in the industry. This reform directly impacted U.S. capital interests, provoking strong dissatisfaction from the U.S. government. What was even more unacceptable to the U.S. was Chavez's explicit opposition to American hegemony. He openly resisted U.S. dominance in Latin America, actively promoted regional integration, and sought to break free from American control over the region. Under Chavez's leadership, Venezuela forged close cooperation with countries like Cuba and Bolivia, forming a regional alliance to counter U.S. hegemony. In 2013, following Chavez's death, Nicolas Maduro was elected president of Venezuela. He not only continued Chavez's anti-American stance but also enshrined anti-Americanism as the nation's foreign policy orientation and defining characteristic, as if taking up the anti-American baton to continue confronting the United States. Since then, the U.S. and Venezuela have plunged into complete confrontation, with ongoing conflicts across diplomatic, economic, and military spheres. Like two boxers locked in a fierce battle, they exchange blows relentlessly, refusing to yield, creating a tense standoff. Facing strategic pressure and economic sanctions from the United States, the Maduro government did not sit idly by. Instead, it actively sought external support, deepening cooperation with countries like Russia, China, and Iran. In May 2025, Maduro personally traveled to Moscow to sign a 10-year comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with Russia. This agreement spans multiple domains including energy cooperation, financial aid, technology transfer, and military collaboration, marking the first time a Latin American nation has forged such a large-scale partnership with Russia. Upon hearing the news, the U.S. government grew highly vigilant, feeling deeply unsettled like a backyard owner discovering an intruder. From America's perspective, Latin America is its exclusive sphere of influence, and it absolutely refuses to allow external powers like Russia to establish roots there. Unease is China's collaboration with Venezuela. Through substantial loans and infrastructure projects, China has deepened bilateral ties with Venezuela. Crucially, renminbi settlement now dominates China-Venezuela oil trade. According to a January 5, 2026, Sina Finance report, by 2025, renminbi settlement had exceeded 85% of China-Venezuela energy trade, with Venezuelan oil exports to China accounting for nearly 90% of its total exports. The two countries also signed the China-Venezuela agreement on the reciprocal promotion and protection of investments to safeguard their cooperation. The shift resembles carving out a renminbi oasis within the dollar-dominated monetary ocean, directly challenging the dollar's hegemonic status. The United States, committed to maintaining the dollar's dominance in global trade, naturally worries that such diversification of settlement currencies will weaken its influence. Consequently, the U.S. has pressured Venezuela through intensified sanctions, attempting to sever its cooperative ties with China and Russia to firmly maintain its sphere of influence in the Caribbean and Latin America. Rumors suggest U.S. Secretary of State Rubio made extreme remarks, stating, "We will not allow Venezuela's oil industry to fall under the control of U.S. adversaries, and we will not permit the Western Hemisphere to become a base for U.S. adversaries." However, these statements lack corroboration from authoritative media sources and constitute misinformation. Based on Rubio's recent public statements, he has indeed repeatedly criticized Venezuela's cooperation with China and Russia. Yet his rhetoric remains within conventional diplomatic frameworks, primarily focusing on condemning electoral irregularities, calling for democratic reforms, and opposing external interference, far less extreme than the rumors suggest. Beyond oil and geopolitics, drug trafficking and immigration have also been leveraged by the Trump administration as justifications for pressuring Venezuela. Yet compared to the first two core motivations, these issues hold significantly lesser importance. Much like resolving minor household troubles doesn't require deploying big guns, addressing drug smuggling and illegal immigration can be substantially mitigated through stringent border controls and enhanced law enforcement. At most, quasi-military forces like the Coast Guard could be deployed for patrols and prevention. Internationally, no country has ever mobilized heavy military assets like nuclear-powered aircraft carriers or submarines to combat drug smuggling. Such actions defy common sense. Yet the Trump administration's explanation to the American public is simplistic and heavy-handed. He publicly asserts that the root causes of drug trafficking and illegal immigration lie in Venezuela's instability, claiming that controlling the U.S.-Mexico border merely treats the symptoms, not the disease. To truly solve the problem, he argues, the Maduro regime must first be overthrown, followed by assistance in rebuilding a new democratic government in Venezuela to achieve prosperity and freedom. In his logic, once Venezuela becomes stable and prosperous, its citizens will no longer seek illegal immigration, and drug trafficking will vanish, a narrative that seems more like a veneer of legitimacy for his pressure tactics. In reality, the U.S. has long used media campaigns to brand the Maduro regime with negative labels like drug smuggling and failed governance, seeking public support for its sanctions and pressure policies. This approach bears striking resemblance to the lead-up to the 2003 Iraq War. Back then, the Bush administration used media campaigns to portray Saddam Hussein as a terrorist dictator and fabricated the lie that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction as justification for military action. Yet history often repeats itself in similar patterns without exact replication. The current U.S. pressure on Venezuela remains confined to sanctions and diplomatic isolation, without any actual military invasion. Rumors of Maduro being arrested and tried by the U.S. are entirely divorced from Venezuela's political reality and represent nothing more than malicious fabrications. Pushing through the fog of rumors, we finally see the true nature of U.S.-Venezuela relations, a contest over oil resources and geopolitics, a contest without gunfire but with surging undercurrents. The false rumors about armed invasion and capturing the president are ultimately fleeting, incapable of altering the core logic of their strategic competition. To truly grasp the complexity of this contest, one must not only discern the current web of interests but also trace the historical context, exploring the inevitabilities and contingencies of this standoff through the ebbs and flows of U.S.-Venezuela relations. Looking back to the latter half of the 20th century, U.S.-Venezuela relations once enjoyed a honeymoon period. At that time, Venezuela, leveraging its abundant oil resources, emerged as a Latin American economic powerhouse, with the United States as its primary export destination. During the 1970s oil crisis that swept the globe, international oil prices soared. propelling Venezuela's economic takeoff through oil exports and elevating it to one of Latin America's high-income nations. During this period, substantial U.S. capital poured into Venezuela's oil sector, forging a tight bond of mutual interests in energy. Venezuelan oil flowed steadily to the United States, fueling rapid industrial growth, while American technology and financing propelled the expansion of Venezuela's oil industry. Caracas streets were lined with skyscrapers and bustling with traffic, earning the city the nickname Paris of the South. This era of prosperity stands as one of the rare peaceful chapters in U.S. Venezuela relations. This peaceful dynamic reached a turning point in 1999 when Hugo Chávez assumed the presidency of Venezuela. Upon taking office, Chávez recognized the critical importance of controlling oil resources for national development. He implemented a series of nationalization reforms in the oil sector, gradually transferring oil assets previously controlled by foreign capital to state ownership. The Venezuelan state-owned oil company, PDVSA, became the absolute dominant player in the industry. These reforms directly challenged U.S. capital interests, provoking strong opposition from the American government. What was even more unacceptable to the U.S. was Chávez's explicit opposition to American hegemony. He openly resisted U.S. hegemonic actions in Latin America, actively promoted regional integration, and sought to break free from U.S. control over the region. Under Chávez's leadership, Venezuela forged close cooperation with countries like Cuba and Bolivia, forming a regional alliance to counter U.S. dominance. In 2002, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency covertly backed Venezuelan opposition forces to orchestrate a coup aimed at overthrowing Chávez's government. Initially, the opposition briefly seized power and detained Chávez. However, owing to his deep support among the populace and military, the coup collapsed after just 47 hours, allowing Chávez to regain power. This failed coup marked the complete breakdown of U.S.-Venezuela relations. Subsequently, the U.S. imposed a series of sanctions on Venezuela, escalating pressure through measures ranging from asset freezes on individuals to restrictions on arms exports. In response, the Chávez government intensified its oil nationalization policies, reduced oil exports to the U.S., and strengthened cooperation with countries like China and Russia, establishing an initial standoff between the two nations. Following Chávez's death in 2013, Maduro was elected president of Venezuela, continuing Chávez's anti-American stance and foreign policy, further deteriorating U.S.-Venezuela relations. In 2017, the U.S. declared it would not recognize the legitimacy of the Maduro government. Citing unfair elections, it supported Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido in declaring himself interim president, attempting to overthrow the Maduro government through regime change. It supported Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido in declaring himself interim president, attempting to overthrow the Maduro government through regime change. This move triggered political divisions within Venezuela and drew opposition from the majority of the international community. The United Nations General Assembly has repeatedly held votes on the Venezuelan issue, with the overwhelming majority of nations advocating respect for Venezuela's sovereignty and territorial integrity while opposing external interference in its internal affairs. Alongside political pressure, the United States has continuously escalated economic sanctions against Venezuela. Since 2018, the U.S. has imposed comprehensive sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry and financial sector, prohibiting American companies from engaging in oil trade with Venezuela, freezing Venezuelan government assets in the U.S., and restricting Venezuela's access to international financial markets for financing. These sanctions have dealt a severe blow to Venezuela's economy. Venezuela, which had relied heavily on oil exports, saw its petroleum revenues plummet and foreign exchange reserves dwindle sharply. The country could no longer import sufficient food, medicine, and other essential supplies, leading to soaring domestic inflation and worsening living conditions for its people. According to the International Monetary Fund, Venezuela's inflation rate surpassed 1,000,000% in 2019, setting a historic record. Massive numbers of citizens, driven by economic hardship, were forced to emigrate overseas, triggering one of the most severe migration crises in Latin America in recent years. Facing U.S. sanctions and pressure, the Maduro government actively sought to break through the blockade. Domestically, it advanced economic reforms, attempting to reduce dependence on the oil economy and develop agriculture, manufacturing, and other industries, while externally expanding cooperation by deepening strategic alliances with China, Russia, Iran, and others. In May 2025, Maduro personally traveled to Moscow to sign a 10-year comprehensive strategic partnership agreement with Russia, covering energy cooperation, financial aid, technology transfer, and military collaboration. Under the agreement, Russia will provide Venezuela with oil extraction technology support to boost its production capacity. In return, Venezuela will increase oil exports to Russia. Both parties also plan to build refineries and petrochemical projects in Venezuela. This cooperation agreement not only injects new vitality into Venezuela's economy but also further enhances Russia's influence in Latin America. Against this backdrop, China's cooperation with Venezuela has also deepened and solidified. As a key strategic partner of Venezuela, China consistently adheres to the principle of non-interference in other countries' internal affairs, engaging in cooperation across various fields with Venezuela on the basis of equality and mutual benefit. In recent years, Sino-Venezuelan collaboration in the energy sector has continuously intensified. China has not only provided substantial loan support to Venezuela but has also participated in the development and construction of multiple Venezuelan oil projects. Notably, the proportion of yuan-denominated settlements in China-Venezuela oil trade has steadily increased, according to a January 5, 2026 report by Sina Finance. Yuan settlements accounted for over 85% of China-Venezuela energy trade in 2025, with Venezuela's oil exports to China representing nearly 90% of its total exports. The bilateral China-Venezuela agreement on the reciprocal promotion and protection of investments provides legal safeguards for the stability of these cooperation. This deep cooperation not only helps Venezuela alleviate economic pressures from sanctions but also provides a crucial safeguard for China's energy security, achieving mutual benefit and win-win outcomes. The United States views China-Russia cooperation with Venezuela with high vigilance, perceiving it as a challenge to its hegemony in Latin America. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio has repeatedly criticized Venezuela's cooperation with China and Russia in public forums, labeling it external interference in Latin American affairs. However, these criticisms lack factual basis and have been widely questioned by the international community. In reality, China and Russia's cooperation with Venezuela is entirely grounded in the principles of equality, mutual benefit, and respect for sovereignty, aligning with fundamental norms of international law. Conversely, it is the United States' sanctions and interference in Venezuela that constitute the true root cause, undermining stability in the Latin American region. U.S. sanctions against Venezuela have not only impacted bilateral relations but also profoundly affected the economic and political landscape of Latin America. Most countries in the region oppose America's unilateral sanctions policy, viewing it as violating international law and fundamental norms of international relations while undermining regional economic integration. In 2024, multiple Latin American nations held elections, revealing a political landscape characterized by left-right rivalry. Leftist parties in Mexico and Venezuela secured consecutive terms, continuing to uphold independent foreign policies and opposing U.S. interference in regional affairs. Meanwhile, nations like Brazil and Argentina, caught in the tug-of-war between leftist and rightist forces, continually adjust their U.S. policies, seeking a balance between safeguarding their own interests and maintaining equilibrium in regional relations. As a key regional integration organization in Latin America, the Southern Common Market Mercosur played a significant role in countering U.S. sanctions and advancing regional cooperation. In July 2024, Bolivia completed its formal accession to Mercosur. In December, Panama became an associate member. Mercosur nations also reached a free trade agreement with the European Union, marking steady progress in regional integration. These developments demonstrate Latin American countries' proactive efforts to break free from external interference and pursue autonomous development through enhanced regional cooperation. Brazilian President Lula has publicly stated that the last thing South America needs is war, articulating the prevailing desire for peaceful development among Latin American nations. China-Latin America cooperation also plays a vital role in the region's integration process. In 2024, guided by high-level diplomacy, China-Latin America relations and cooperation expanded in scope, improved in quality, and enhanced in effectiveness. This year saw leaders from multiple Latin American nations including Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Suriname, and Peru visit China successively, with both sides reaching multiple cooperative agreements in areas such as trade, energy, and infrastructure development. On December 18th, the maiden voyage of the new Shanghai vessel, the first ship on the Qiao-Shanghai shipping route, arrived at Shanghai port, marking the inaugural two-way maritime connection between Qiao and Shanghai. The Qiao port project not only brings substantial economic returns and creates numerous jobs for Peru but also strengthens the country's role as a gateway connecting land and sea, linking Asia and Latin America. It will drive the overall development and integration of the Latin American and Caribbean region. Maria Astro, a scholar at the Asian Studies Center of Peru's San Marcos University, believes that Qianhai port will enable South American countries to better integrate into the global logistics chain and is poised to become a catalyst for economic integration among South American nations. Cultural exchanges between China and Latin America have also been a highlight of this process. In November 2024, the inaugural high-level forum on media and think tanks was held in São Paulo, Brazil, with leaders from multiple countries sending congratulatory messages to the forum. Civilizational exchanges between China and Latin America unfolded in succession. The Transoceanic Dialogue of National Treasures from China and Peru. The China-Latin America Civilizational Dialogue Forum in Peru. Broadcasts of dozens of outstanding Chinese audiovisual programs across Latin America. And the China-Brazil Youth Storytelling Session Bridging Hearts and Minds. New or resumed direct flights between China and countries like Brazil, Mexico, and Cuba built fresh bridges for trans-hemispheric exchanges. These exchanges and collaborations not only deepened mutual understanding and friendship between the Chinese and Latin American peoples but also injected powerful momentum into China-Latin America cooperative development. Returning to the core issue of the U.S. Venezuela standoff, oil resources remain the key battleground. As the nation with the world's largest proven oil reserves, Venezuela's oil industry's fortunes impact not only its own economy but also the global oil market landscape. U.S. sanctions on Venezuela's oil sector have caused its production to plummet dramatically from a peak of 3 million barrels per day to less than 750,000 barrels today. This shift has not only stripped Venezuela of its primary economic pillar but also disrupted global oil supply. Against the backdrop of volatile international oil prices, Venezuela's unstable production further exacerbates uncertainty in the global energy market. Notably, on January 8, 2026, U.S. Treasury Secretary Benson unexpectedly announced the lifting of certain sanctions against Venezuelan entities. This statement drew widespread international attention and was interpreted as a potential signal of easing U.S.-Venezuela relations. Benson stated that the U.S. aims to stabilize Venezuela's existing structures. Regarding assets within Venezuela, the U.S. Treasury Department will oversee their sale and, per instructions from Secretary of State Rubio, return proceeds to Venezuela. Benson also revealed that independent oil companies are eager to invest in Venezuela promptly, while major oil corporations may proceed with greater caution in their operations there. The sudden adjustment to U.S. sanctions policy toward Venezuela stems from complex considerations. From an energy strategy perspective, the global energy market landscape has undergone profound changes in recent years. Although the U.S. has achieved energy self-sufficiency, It still requires a stable international energy market environment to safeguard its economic interests. The recovery of Venezuela's oil production would help alleviate global oil supply tensions and curb excessive increases in international oil prices, aligning with U.S. energy security interests. From a geopolitical perspective, the U.S. aims to improve relations with Venezuela by easing certain sanctions, thereby weakening the influence of China and Russia in the country and re-establishing its hegemonic position in Latin America. Additionally, domestic political and economic conditions have influenced this policy shift. Against the backdrop of sluggish economic recovery, the U.S. seeks to expand overseas markets and identify new investment opportunities for domestic enterprises. The Venezuelan government has adopted a cautious stance toward the U.S. sanctions adjustments. The Maduro administration stated that while it welcomes the lifting of certain sanctions, this represents only the first step toward easing U.S.-Venezuela relations. The U.S. must completely lift all sanctions against Venezuela, respect its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and cease interfering in its internal affairs to create favorable conditions for improving bilateral relations. The Venezuelan Foreign Ministry spokesperson emphasized that Venezuela will steadfastly pursue an independent foreign policy, cooperating with other nations on the basis of equality and mutual benefit. The country will not alter its development trajectory due to adjustments in U.S. sanctions policy. The international community has generally welcomed the U.S. adjustment of its sanctions policy toward Venezuela, viewing it as a step that could alleviate Venezuela's economic hardships and promote a thaw in U.S.-Venezuela relations. Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated that the United Nations will continue to play a constructive role in promoting a political solution to the Venezuelan issue. He called on the international community to respect Venezuela's sovereignty and territorial integrity, resolving differences through dialogue and consultation. Latin American countries have expressed hope that both the United States and Venezuela will seize this opportunity to normalize relations through equal dialogue, thereby contributing to regional peace and stability. However, easing U.S.-Venezuela tensions remains challenging, as deep disagreements persist on numerous issues. While the U.S. has lifted some sanctions, it has not abandoned political pressure on the Maduro government and continues to call for democratic reforms in Venezuela. Venezuela, meanwhile, insists its political system is chosen by its own people and that external interference is unacceptable. Furthermore, consensus in areas such as oil resource development and economic cooperation will require prolonged negotiations and consultations. It is foreseeable that the improvement of U.S.-Venezuela relations will be a protracted and tortuous process, potentially subject to interference and influence from various factors. From a global governance perspective, resolving the Venezuelan issue requires not only joint efforts by the U.S. and Venezuela, but also active participation from the international community. Amidst the current rise of unilateralism and protectionism, respecting national sovereignty and territorial integrity while resolving international disputes through dialogue and consultation has become a widely accepted consensus. A political solution to the Venezuelan crisis would offer valuable insights for addressing similar global challenges and contribute to upholding international fairness, justice, and the multilateral order. Looking back at this game of chess over Venezuela, we can clearly see how the lure of oil resources, geopolitical maneuvering, and ideological differences intertwine to form the complex landscape of U.S.-Venezuela relations. The widely circulated rumors of armed invasion and presidential arrest are merely noise in this strategic game, incapable of altering the fundamental trajectory of events. In today's era of deepening globalization, the interests of nations are intertwined and interdependent. No country can maximize its own interests through unilateral sanctions or threats of force. Only by upholding equality, mutual benefit, respect for sovereignty, and dialogue and consultation can we achieve shared development and prosperity for all nations. In Caracas of 2026, sunlight still bathes the oil fields along the Orinoco River. The rhythmic clatter of pumping units, though slow, resonates with resilience. Venezuela is struggling to break free from the shackles of sanctions, while U.S. Venezuela relations show faint glimmers of thawing. Where will this silent contest lead? Can Venezuela achieve economic recovery and social stability? The international community will continue to watch closely. Regardless, respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations and resolving differences through dialogue and consultation remain the only correct path to address Venezuela's challenges and an essential requirement for maintaining global peace and stability. Amid this contest, the deepening of China-Latin America cooperation has injected new vitality into the region's development. China consistently adheres to the principle of non-interference in other countries' internal affairs, engaging in cooperation with Latin American nations on the basis of equality and mutual benefit. This has provided robust support for the region's economic growth and social progress. As China-Latin America cooperation continues to deepen, Latin American countries will gradually free themselves from external interference, achieve autonomous development, and make significant contributions to the advancement of the global South. For the international community, the lessons from the Venezuela issue profoundly demonstrate that no country should place its own interests above those of others, nor should it interfere in the internal affairs of other nations through unilateral sanctions, threats of force, or similar means. Only by upholding multilateralism, respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, and resolving international disputes through dialogue and consultation can we build a world of lasting peace, universal security, and shared prosperity. In the future process of global governance, the international community must further strengthen cooperation to jointly address various global challenges and advance the establishment of a more just and equitable international order. Sunlight pierces through the clouds, bathing the streets of Caracas in warmth. Pedestrians hurry along, and markets brim with the bustle of daily life. The former panic and uncertainty are gradually dissipating, replaced by a stable social order and a hint of easing diplomatic tensions. Venezuela's story continues, and the strategic competition between the United States and Venezuela is far from over. Yet we have reason to believe that through the collective efforts of the international community, this contest over oil and geopolitics will ultimately shift toward dialogue and cooperation, bringing new hope for peace and development in Latin America.